and then the do part, which is where we normally go first, is I think, there are some techniques, which I can tell you about, that I think really help people in change. And change that's what entrepreneurs are doing, right? You're starting a change. It's synonymous. And I can tell you about more of what I've learned. But one of the things that's funny, when we were talking earlier about resilience, I call it the WaveMaker DNA. One of the WaveMaker DNA elements is adaptable persistence. That's a quality that all of them shared, all walks of life, whether they were entrepreneurs, senior executive, community leaders. And what that means.
We're your co-hosts, Vicky and Laura, and this is the Resilient Entrepreneurs Podcast, the ultimate guide for ambitious business founders and startups. Hear from business heroes who've faced unexpected challenges as we unpack how they slayed their dragon and reignite your instinct to conquer your dragon.
Well, first off, thank you all for having me. It's fun to be with you all. My childhood. So I grew up in a very small town in Oklahoma. So I say that just because if you had told me when I was growing up that I would be doing what I'm doing now, it would have been beyond comprehension. So my world was a little bit smaller. Neither of my parents had graduated from college, but they certainly encouraged education. And I kind of just worked my way through it. So I kind of think of myself in my life in three chunks. One of them was growing up in this small town in Oklahoma. And then I end up starting my career at Accenture, this big management consulting company. And then the entrepreneurial phase, the third phase, which is where I started a company, and we'll talk about that. But those three chapters. So I guess I would say to anybody who's thinking, wow, from where I'm sitting, I don't even see how I can get there. I didn't get there by having this big vision. I just got there by resilience, which is what you talk about, just kind of step by step and figuring out what was in front of me. Because my world's pretty small growing up, honestly.
Yeah. I think that's super relatable for a lot of people coming from a small town. I mean, hey, I'm from Bermuda. It's like one small town here.
Yes.
So definitely hard to sometimes see the bigger world and the bigger picture of your life. Really interested in that transition from working for someone else to working for yourself.
But I had gotten myself to a point where my jobs were big. I was in a global role. And I was trying to I couldn't figure out how to put my life together the way I wanted. It's like a bit like the Rubik's Cube. I was trying to I was still career minded. I was ambitious. I wanted to do big things. But we had two young boys. And I couldn't figure out, I didn't want to take a big step back in my career, but I also wanted a little bit more control of my life. Honestly, those two things kind of collided. And I am kind of a risk averse person. So if anybody who is in that category is thinking about starting your own business, that was kind of me. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, far from perfect, but I kind of wanted to know everything was going to be just right. And so it took me probably a couple of years to get the courage up to start my own business and take the leap. I think one thing I would say there, for me, I had to outfox my brain a little bit because I was kind of risk averse. I was afraid of screwing up. My work was not a hobby. So I did a little mind game on myself and said, okay, we're going to do an experiment for a year. And you're going to try to start this business. And then after a year, you will know if this is the path for you. If not, you can go right back and find a comparable job. I left certainly Accenture on good terms. I could have gone back. But I kind of that was my mental permission slip to sort of say, you can take the risk. You put some boundaries around. I had very low expectations on income. Everybody had told me it takes, your first year starting a business, it's very rare that you're going to just hit it in the cheap seats, right? To use a baseball analogy. But at the end of the year, all signs were I was doing the right thing, and I stuck with it. So that's probably, I learned a ton, which we can talk about, but that for me was the mental part of it that gave me kind of that ability to go. you know?
Thank you for sharing that story. And I love that what I'm hearing you say, Patty, is that the thing that gave you the courage was yourself. You weren't waiting
Yes.
for the courage to come, but
Mhm.
you found a creative way to channel courage.
Let's try it. And I had not, back to how I grew up, some people grew up in families they had entrepreneurial parents, or, my family owned a business, or none of it. I had none of it. And so I didn't really know what I was getting into, honestly. Thought I knew more than I did. But so it was, yes, giving myself permission to do something that was very foreign, honestly. Very foreign. Yeah.
That must
I
have
think in a
taken a
lot of
lot of
ways,
resilience.
yeah, in a lot of ways, it's better not to know.
It is.
It's better
I,
not to know. That little bit of zone of ignorance when you first start out actually kind of helps, because
it
if you kind of
does.
knew everything that was coming, you might hesitate. So you got to kind of go for it a little bit.
I think that's right. And, I had come out of a pretty big job, and I had, a big company, and there's processes and tools, and I had an assistant and a team, and I had the stuff, right? I had all this stuff. And when you start your own business, no matter if you're in a big job or not, you got to get ready. Like, you're looking in the mirror a lot for answers. It's like, oh, how am I going to do this? Well, guess who's going to be figuring it out? That would be me. And so it's actually really good for me, honestly. But I agree with you, Laura. I mean, if you knew everything that you didn't know, it'd probably keep you stuck, wouldn't it? Mhm.
Well, let's talk then a little bit about what resilience means to you, Patty, because obviously that involved some level of resilience to get through that first year, let alone anything else that you might have met along the
Right.
way.
That first year in starting as an entrepreneur, there's a lot there. I think the resilience for me, I'm a big believer in informed gut instinct, I guess would be the way I would say it. It's like I feel more comfortable in times that are like new and high change, which is what I, tend to write and talk about, is how do you get through a change, start a change. And it's like informing yourself, but also relying on your gut instinct, which is also telling you what feels right for me. You can't just do one or the other. You kind of need both. And so I think my resilience was helped by, and I said it took me 2 years to get started. I probably spent that last 6 or 8 months just going out and talking to everyone. It was a little bit of my security blanket, because I was talking to people who had started their own business, and every person I talked to, and to this day, I have just little kernels of, you know, oh, that matters. That resonates with me. I could quote some right now. But I bet I talked to 20, 25 people. And then I started to build my confidence, which meant I could take on the resilience. I knew I could keep going because I had educated myself. And I will say one of the hardest parts for me, and I don't know if in talking to some of your other guests you've gotten into, is this blend of, when you start your own business, you have to be an advocate for your company, right? You got to be out there, whether you want to call it selling, business development, depending on what kind of business you're in, that's part of it. It's not, just, you can create great products, you can be the great website, all the stuff, but you have got to get out there and build advocates for your business, build relationships. And that was one thing I learned early on, and often when I talk to people who are thinking about starting their company, they'll talk about some of the internal stuff. It's like, yes, and you know what I mean? You've got to build interest. So you got to think about that external. How am I going to build this market interest? How am I going to make this business grow in the market? And so I think this resilience of knowing what your strengths are, what comes naturally to you, and then what am I going to have to really push myself on so I can keep, to make the business successful?
Yeah. Oh, you've nailed it there. It's so many points you just brought up. I mean, everything from, when you do start up, you are the CEO and you are the janitor, and
You
you got to
are.
figure out everything in
Yeah.
between. Like,
So,
what do you do
ladies,
next?
why do we do it? When it's so hard and there's so many balls in the air, why do we do this thing called entrepreneurship and having our own business?
There's nothing like it, really. Um, Creating something. And for me, my business, I started, a consulting change in consulting company, People Results, about 15 years ago. And we were just recently acquired by a private equity firm. And it's been a really good experience transition. But
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. But I do think it is, I always encourage, I was just talking to somebody actually yesterday about this very topic. Like, you have to go in eyes wide open, right? I believe in any situation, you want to know there's some beautiful things about starting a business, just creating something out of your vision, having no boundaries. You have control that you don't have. You can decide what you want to spend your time on, what matters. You can learn a ton, which is great, but you're also going to have that counterbalance. Like we were talking about, Laura, you mentioned, you're at the plate 24/7. You don't get to quote, go home. It's that's when you're building a business and you're financially responsible in ways you've never been responsible before. So I always say to people, like, always make sure you know the beauty of it, the joy, the excitement, because everybody loves, I'm being my own boss. Who wouldn't love that?
Right.
Also, you're going to have bumps. You're going to have setbacks. If you know the downsides before you set out, you're not going to be surprised. That's part of being an entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah, 1,000%. I mean, we talk a lot on this podcast about failure and failure mindset,
Yes.
because it's really important to get clear on that and how you're going to handle the challenges that come.
That was
Yeah.
certainly my experience. I think being organic and let the market and the situation inform you. I know that there are a lot of people who have come, especially if you've come out of an environment where changing your plan was kind of a failure. You weren't right. You messed up. You didn't know what you were doing. And I think the mindset of an entrepreneur has to be like, directionally, this is where I'm going. I'm going to constantly reassess. And I think that was for us kind of that more organic growth. And some of the things early on, we thought, oh, this is going to be a big thing for us. Well, it's like you kind of got to read the market and realize, that's not really what's going on, as well as sometimes the market changes. What are people talking about right now? You're like, right now, it's AI. Well, okay, if you're in a services business, most services business, you better at least be able to talk about how that is influencing their work. So it is for those of you, the entrepreneurs who think I got to have everything figured out, you can relax, because you can't, right? You're not going to. And if you think you have, pretty good chance you got some blind spots that are going to catch up with you. So it's okay. You just take it as you go,
I love that message. I love that message. It's about trusting ourselves that whatever comes along, we've got that. And that's my personal definition of resilience. It's knowing that whatever comes along, you've got it. It's okay. You can trust yourself to get through anything. And I also really enjoyed how when we asked you about failure, you didn't really have an example of failure. And to me, that speaks volumes around what your mindset of failure is, that there is no such thing. That everything that someone else might consider a failure or a pitfall, you've seen it as an opportunity for growth, as an opportunity to learn something new, to pivot, to swivel. And I really appreciate that viewpoint, that what is this word failure?
Right. Right. And it's also, you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have to learn your way through it, and I also think it's
So
interesting.
part of it.
Yeah. What you said, Vicky, in my world, I've done a lot on leading change. How do you make changes happen in organizations and leaders and so on? And in the work I've done with my clients and the research I've done, there's been one consistent mantra that people who can lead change, this resilience mindset of is, I can figure it out again and again and again. Even people who started businesses with nothing. Like, one of the people I featured in my book is Alan Stevenson, who started Southern Tide. It's a successful clothing and now home goods, really successful business, was recently acquired, expanded. You talk to him when he started, he dropped out of med school. He didn't know a single thing about making, he started with shirts. He didn't know how to produce shirts. He didn't know anything about running a business, didn't know anything about production, nothing. And he was baby steps through it. But from the beginning, I'm like, well, were you afraid? Da, 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 da. How do you, he's like, more than anything, I just felt like I could figure it out, or I could find the people who could help me figure it out. And I could give you dozens and dozens of examples, but that belief of I can figure it out is super important, I think, with entrepreneurs. If you're going to start your own business, you have to have that. It's also some confidence. I don't know everything I need to know today, but I can figure it out. Consistent on people who started businesses, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Nailed it there. Why is change such an important topic for you? Why has that been what you've
Mhm.
centered your work around?
Because it's a part of life. I mean, I think we all could sit and talk about the personal changes in our life, whether it's moving into being a new parent, moving into a brand new city you've never been, but you're there because your partner needed to relocate, losing a parent. Um, those are all personal changes. But you think about at work, I mean, it's pretty much constant. Those days of thinking, once I get past this, this little period, things are going to settle down and get back to normal. I mean, probably no, that's probably not going to happen. You might be waiting for that to happen, but that's probably not going to happen. So it's back to, your theme of resilience. Um, to me, it's like it is the undercurrent of life and work. And a lot of the work we did was helping organizations you know, figure out how to do the acquisition, how to do the merger, how to do the transformation, the reorganization. But the thing that I found interesting and really that I've done my research and my work on is it kind of comes down to individual behavior. Organizations are just a bunch of people. So it comes down to the individual behavior that lets you figure out how do I lead this change and manage through it, whether it's starting a new business or it's going through a personal change in your life.
So my question is then, so is it a mindset thing that helps people to navigate change the most?
I think, and I talk about this in the book, I think it's three pieces. I think it is a very simple framework of think, know, do. I do think mindset is honestly, for me, it was almost the forgotten at the beginning because when I first started really putting my thoughts together, I'm a consultant, right? I'm very focused on actions, the do, get stuff done. What are the results? Da, da, da. Well, really, if you think about it, how we're thinking about it determines if we ever get started, and especially from an entrepreneur's standpoint, if you're driven by fear of failure, I might not be good enough. What if I start a business and it doesn't go? If you're a perfectionist that says I have to get it right before I can even begin, um, those are all things that are going to undermine you. And so I think thoughts are important. The second thing is know, what do you need to know today that you don't already know? If you are starting a business, there's going to be a pretty good little list. And I always encourage people, they're not all equal though. Figure out, okay, for this first 2 or 3 months, what do I need to learn that I don't know today? Because you've got to like prioritize them in some way. Otherwise, I've got 47 things I need to go learn. They're not all equal, right? So, but recognizing it, what do I need to learn that I don't? And then the do part, which is where we normally go first, is I think, there are some techniques, which I can tell you about, that I think really help people in change. And change that's what entrepreneurs are doing, right? You're starting a change. It's synonymous. And I could tell you about more of what I've learned. But one of the things that's funny, when we were talking earlier about resilience, I call it the WaveMaker DNA. One of the WaveMaker DNA elements is adaptable persistence. That's a quality that all of them shared, all walks of life, whether they were entrepreneurs, senior executive, community leaders. And what that means is it's resilience, because that means I'm going to be persistent. I'm not going to give up easy. But adaptable means I'm learning, I'm adjusting as I go, right? I'm gonna keep evolving. I would say it's like the kid in the maze at the playground, You hit the wall, move, hit the wall, move. So you just keep adapting and adjusting. It's not the person that's just blindly, this is my goal and I'm not going to change it. It's also not the person that's giving up easily. And so that is a quality that I think is my word for resilience. It's being adaptable, but it's also being persistent. And we could dive into a whole lot more there, depending upon what you think would be helpful here. But that is a big element in WaveMaker DNA.
Hang on, hold that thought. I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to take 15 seconds of your time to thank you for being a part of this growing community of resilient entrepreneurs. If you could do us just one massive favor and subscribe, you'll be notified of the next great episode of this podcast. And speaking of great episodes, let's get right back to it.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about this. And to me, it feels, when you describe that characteristic, it feels so much lighter and easier than this kind of struggle through, or, oh, like you described, I've hit a wall, I'm going to have to change it all.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very different feeling around what you've described, is accepting that this is the way to go, accepting this is the path. The path will require adjustments and it will require consistency. I love that. So tell us more. I mean, you said there's some techniques you could share around how to make this change process easier, or
Right. I think when you talk about the do part of it, there's a few things I think you can do. And one of them is being willing to experiment and try something. I know we did that on many things. We're going to experiment and we're going to see where it goes. It's not a failure, but especially when you're starting a business, we're going to start with 3 services. And we're going to try this one that's a little bit of an outlier. We have a hunch. We're going to see, we're going to give a little bit of time, but it might not work. To me, when you label something an experiment, it's not a failure. Like you said, Vicki, it's kind of how you brand this stuff. If it's or maybe it's Laura, like if you go in with the mindset of, we're going to see how it goes, it's not a failure if it doesn't work. We tried it and it didn't. So I think experimentation. I also think I'm a big believer in, you're trying to change behavior to get more comfortable being an entrepreneur, is dream big, but start small. We know all the research from Atomic Habits, Tiny Habits tells us that we need achievable, smaller goals, which is kind of counter to all of us who are these type A people that want to do everything, smaller goals, and keep and build on it and build on it and build on it. So I think incrementalism is very important. Because that's why we know our New Year's resolutions by the middle of February, everybody's like, oh, what were those? We don't talk about them anymore, right? They're gone by then. But if you are like building on small steps as you go, especially as an entrepreneur, what can I do right now to get started and build on it? I also think having a learning mindset of, instead of thinking, well, what are my to-dos? The smart thing is always to be asking yourself at least once a month, what did I learn last month that I didn't know? How do I need to change my plan? How do I need to change my approach? Based on what I'm learning. Because if you're not learning, right, you're doing something new, that kind of is a conflict. So those are a few things. Adaptable planning as a result, and have your big goal of starting your business, but the steps of how you get there, it's a lot more organic than maybe some of us think starting off. Those are a few. I could go on, but those are a few.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm also curious about this analogy around waves. It's in the title of your book, Make Waves. Yeah. It's the title of your podcast. Where does this come in? Share with us the passion for waves.
Well, it's funny. Well, I have a lot of waves. People give me a lot of wave gifts, and so it's fantastic. Little figures. Twofold. I think one is, a lot of times, we've kind of grown up in organizations where don't make waves was sort of like status quo. Keep the status quo. Protect the status quo.
Families too, I might add.
Of course, yes. Whatever the traditions, right? That, and I also think waves are kind of like incremental. They're momentum. They build, the momentum builds over time. And so the analogy of it, I think those two things, they kind of like, I don't know. That was just always the term I used, or people that, I thought were like people who doing big things or starting a new business. I was kind of called them wave makers, like people who were stepping out and doing the bold thing instead of the predictable.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. And if I may expand the analogy, what it meant for me when I read that was that waves are a consistent, never-ending thing,
Correct.
which is exactly what we're talking about here. Every wave is different.
Hmm.
Every wave crashes on the shore differently, yet
Hmm.
you know there's going to be another wave. And then
Hmm.
there's that seven waves. There's an analogy we use in marketing, helping people with their marketing, is the seven wave factor,
Yeah.
which Laura explains better than I do. But yeah, so there's a lot going on there with the waves. I love that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's great for an entrepreneur to think of themselves as someone who's out there to make waves, because I think what an entrepreneur, especially when you're first starting out and you're maybe a solo entrepreneur, maybe you just have a small team, it's like you're in a speedboat, right? Like you can go really fast. Those big corporations, they move really slow. They can't,
Oh, big
that
time.
adaptability is a lot harder when you've
It
got
is.
500 employees, right?
Yeah.
Like it is really hard to make the change. So,
Mhm.
as someone who is, much smaller in team, you can make a lot of change
You
and you
can.
can disrupt your industry even. And
Yes.
I think it's good to think that way sometimes, because maybe you're bringing something better, something bolder, something more impactful.
Never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And so I was, in some ways, I had to reset my own definition of what does success look like for me. And I think that'd be one of the things I would encourage people to do, is to know your must haves when you start the business. What are the things you must have for it to be a satisfying experience? And that might be the kind of work. I always also encourage people financially. When you start your own business, what must you have? What must you earn for this to be workable for you? So you aren't, and how soon must that happen? I think also knowing, like, what am I really good at and what I'm going to need to learn to do. Am I willing to do it? Can I do it? Am I going to have to find somebody else to do it? And so I think my dragons were more around those areas where I was like, I honestly, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. Never. I've been in this big company, as I said. And so my dragons, a lot of my dragons were internal, um, taking more risk than what I maybe my natural little setting would have done. um, Also, the other thing that you said, Laura, that kind of resonates with me in terms of, you don't have to be like, boldness doesn't mean caution to the wind. Let's do whatever. It doesn't have to be that. It just has to be, I'm willing to look at things differently. We all have, the way it's been done is imprinted on our little brain. We know our brain loves habits because that's what makes us efficient. You've got to bust past those habits of the way things are supposed to be able to have the courage to step out and start your own business. And can you do it? So for me, I mean, it's funny, I hadn't really thought about it. I think most of my dragons were in my own head, to be honest. How do I show up? How can I be myself and start a business? How can I sell work and not be sleazy? Or in my mind, I'm thinking that's not really how I want to be. And, all those things that I had to get past, um, that were outwardly, I don't even know sometimes if people even knew it, that inside I was like, ping, 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 all these thoughts, of how do I do this, you know?
Absolutely no, absolutely no. I think we've both been through that and continue to
Yes,
go through it. It's a lifelong learning of,
it
what else is
is.
under there that I didn't know about. You talked about blind spots as well. It's when you don't feel it, it's just because you haven't seen it yet, I think.
That's
There's
right.
always going to be the next layer of
Mhm,
needing to talk yourself into courage or needing to inform yourself
mhm.
by asking others and modeling excellence and some of those
Yeah,
things that you talked about.
for sure.
Yeah. And Patty, I can see that, I mean, you have your own podcast talking about
Mhm.
change,
Yep.
and uh, I was just looking for the name of it, Be a WaveMaker,
Mhm.
Conversations on Change. And I
Change.
can really
Yep.
see how this will help a lot of people, whether they're in an entrepreneurial space or not.
Right.
And also, I mean, you're not just publishing your own book, but also Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Fast Company. I mean, the list goes on.
Thank
It's
you.
really a privilege and a pleasure to have you sharing your insights with us
Sure.
today. And
Thank you.
I'd love for us to maybe take a pause and see what are the takeaways that
Hmm.
each of us have from this conversation.
Sure.
Um, yeah, but
Yeah. Do you
what
want
do
me to
you
start?
think is the? Yeah, let's do it. Let's hear it.
Right. I think I was thinking here, I mean, I'm picturing myself back when I first started or an entrepreneur that might be listening. I think the takeaways for me are really thinking small at the beginning. Okay, if I want to start this this business, what is it going to take for me to have the courage to do it? And then once I do it, decide I am going to do it, what do I need this first couple of months? I don't know. That might be something you personally need to work on. It might need to be, you need to identify an expert, but it can feel so overwhelming unless you are an entrepreneur at heart and this just comes naturally to you. Wonderful for you. That was not me, but it's like, you just gotta just like take things down really, really small. That's one. The second piece of advice I would give, which we touched on just a bit, and that is know your must haves. Be really clear. Why do I want this? What is my personal definition of success? Not everybody else's definition. My personal, what will make me content? What will make it worthwhile for me? And put those down and know them, because that's going to be your filter upon which you're going to like make decisions from. Is this going to help me toward my must haves, or is it a distraction? Is it what the external people are saying I need to do? And the third thing, you got to figure out how to do you in this, because if you are starting a business and it conflicts with your core of who you are, it's going to create a lot of stress. There's going to be stress anyway. There's going to be outside stress. That's just part of it. It's part of any business, right? Especially entrepreneur. But you're going to create more of it if you try to go against your tide, to use another a term around the ocean. Kind of like, you got to do you. What is it who am I as a person? How can I best bring that to the party here, and don't lose sight of it? So those are three that I think, in terms of, a lot of them are just like thoughts more than actions. But I think if you get those right, you can take on the actions.
Yeah, love that. Vicky, you want to go next?
Oh, goody. Okay. Thank you, Patty. They were amazing takeaways. And yeah, wow. It's funny. It's one of those things that this is a conversation that could just keep going. As
It
far
could.
as each one thing that you just teased out there could be another whole episode, because there's so much there to really share stories and experiences
Mhm.
around. And we thank you for sharing yours. I My takeaway would be this concept of adaptable persistence. This consistency is a big word for Laura and I, the way
Yeah.
we help people as well. That adaptability of it, and this whole concept of whatever we do, it's going to be an experiment.
Yeah.
And working from that frame, I think it really lightens the load. It takes the pressure off anybody who's trying something new and trying to impact change. And I really love how you frame that entrepreneurs are about creating change. It's about creating a cause.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be in business, even if it is widgets that we're selling. We wouldn't be doing that if there wasn't something deep inside of us that called us to say, we want to make change in the
Yeah.
community by getting this into the hands of others. So
Right.
really enjoyed that insight. The big goals and small steps, you've just touched on that. You took that one from me. I love that when you were looking for courage, you modeled excellence. You got informed. You spoke to people who'd been there, done that, to kind of understand what you were getting into. And it's a beautiful way of combating this perfectionism, this need for us to know it all, to be able to see the whole spiral staircase, even though we know we'll never see the top of the spiral staircase from the bottom. We just need to see the first couple of steps.
Right.
So thank you for that. And then my last one was think, no, do. Is that the third part? Think, no, do. I really appreciate that frame. I think it's really useful that people can take with them and consider several times a day as they're facing challenges.
Right. I will say one other thing I would add, Vicki, is when you talked about getting out and talking to people and getting input. The other thing you're doing is you're building advocates for your business as you go. So all those people are out talking. I'm going to start this business, and what do you think? Meanwhile, you're also building a community around whatever it is you're trying to do at the same time while you're educating yourself. So it's good all the way around.
That's such a good point. We forget the impact we have where we talk about what we're called to do. We forget that. We think it's all about us and we're getting information. It's a one-way thing, but it's a two-way thing. You're sharing your heart, sharing your idea. Of course, that's already creating impact. Thank you for that reminder. Yes.
Of course.
Okay, so it's painful going after the two of you because you stole all my same exact takeaways. Vicki and we're guilty of always having one brain. So absolutely just cannot, go high five to all of that 100%. There is the one thing that you said in the very beginning that resonated a lot was giving yourself a mental permission slip to go for it. Mm-hmm. Like you put things in, you prepared yourself, did some research, you talked to a lot of people, you gave yourself a runway. These are amazing ways to start before you leap off the edge of the cliff. But giving yourself that, we're just going to do it for a year. By the end of the year, we'll know. And that's
no
okay.
Big deal.
Yeah, it's no big deal. I think you got to have that a little bit. It's almost, and what we talked about, sort of the like not knowing what you don't know is a good thing. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think just embrace that, embrace that at the beginning stage of entrepreneurship. You don't know what you don't know. You're going to just have to be open and adaptable to figuring things out. You're going to have to know what you do know, hone in on that, be the best at that, gather people around you to help you with the rest, to either teach you what you do need to know, mentor you and guide you. So coaches, mentors are important. And also outsourcing becomes a factor too. At some point, you'll need to get some help. You just will, whether that's with the finances or the marketing or whatever part of the business. Mm-hmm. Over time, that's the type of stuff you build as you build a business. So it is an exciting thing to do. Entrepreneurship is the best learning development.
It is.
Personal development journey you'll ever go on. You'll learn more about yourself and who you are, what you're capable of than anything else you do in life.
This is true.
And that's the best part. And hey, being resilient is the key to all of it. So that's why we call this podcast the Resilient Entrepreneur Podcast. And we talk to amazing entrepreneurs like you who are out there driving change, making change, helping people understand how to be those change makers, because I'm sure everyone listening is a change maker in their own way too. So Patti, just want to wrap this up by saying thank you so much. Appreciate your time and energy and insight. And we'll link in the show notes your book so people can get access to that.
Thank you.
And access to you. So thank you.
Yeah, here's to having more wave makers in the world. Yes, let's go out there and make some waves.
We do. Thank you all. It was so fun talking to you. I really appreciate you asking me to join you.